I had everything once. The crisp, embossed Harvard acceptance letter felt like a golden ticket in my hand. A trust fund, carefully managed by my grandmother, sat waiting to launch my future. And David, my perfect fiancé, the boy I'd loved since our freshman year poli-sci class, had just slipped a diamond onto my finger. My twin sister Emma watched it all from the shadows of our shared life, a corrosive jealousy eating her from the inside out. The night before my wedding, that acid boiled over. She cornered me in our childhood bedroom, a place of shared dreams now a stage for my nightmare. A gun, stolen from our father's collection, trembled in her perfectly manicured fingers. One bullet. It tore through my shoulder, a searing, white-hot pain that sent me tumbling backward down the steep basement stairs. The last thing I remember was the splintering crack of my own bones on the concrete floor. Emma dragged my limp body into the old, forgotten wine cellar, leaving me to die among the cobwebs, the dust, and the skittering sounds of rat droppings. She took my wedding dress. She took my name. She took my life. While I bled out in the suffocating darkness, she married David, my David, and began living the life that was meant for me. 20 years. That's how long it took for the ghost to come back. I didn't die in that cellar. On the third day, delirious from infection and pain, I'd managed to crawl out. I was a broken thing, a collection of shattered bones and a spirit ground to dust. I rebuilt myself piece by painful piece as Sarah Mitchell, a nobody. My life became a cramped studio apartment that always smelled faintly of burnt toast and loneliness. The harsh, sterile scent of antiseptic became my perfume. The fluorescent lights of the hospital where I worked as a night shift nurse, my only sun and moon. For 2 decades, I lived in that quiet gray limbo, the memory of my old life, a phantom limb that ached with a pain no morphine could touch. Then, one Tuesday morning, during my post-shift ritual of black coffee and a day-old newspaper, I saw it. A society page announcement. Local student named valedictorian. And there she was, Lily Archer. My last name, Emma's daughter. A girl with my eyes, my cheekbones, my genetic signature, staring back at me from the glossy paper. 19 and luminous, the spitting image of the girl I used to be. The quiet, gray world I had built for myself shattered. The ghost was awake. That newspaper clipping became my new obsession. The stalking began slowly at first, a tentative toe dipped back into a world I had fled. I started by driving past the house, my house, the beautiful colonial with the wraparound porch I had picked out with David, the one we were supposed to fill with children and laughter. Emma had done a nice job with the garden. Peonies, my favorite. The irony was a bitter pill. I parked my beat-up sedan down the street, hidden by the shade of an old oak tree, and I watched. I learned their routines with the meticulous patience of a predator. Emma left at 8:15 a.m. every morning in a sleek black Mercedes, my dream car, on her way to the prestigious nonprofit she ran. David, a successful surgeon now, left a little later in his Tesla. Lily would leave for her classes at the university, sometimes laughing on the phone, her voice carrying on the morning breeze, a sound that was both beautiful and agonizing. For months, I was a shadow they never saw, a ghost haunting the periphery of their perfect life. I saw them at the grocery store, Emma filling the cart with organic produce and expensive wine. I saw them at the park, David pushing a younger son, their miracle child, on the swings. They had built a whole world on top of my grave. A world of soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, and anniversary dinners at restaurants I could never afford. The rage was a constant, low hum beneath my skin. Emma had my life, my husband, my children. She had my name. But the deepest, most soul-crushing blow came one rainy afternoon. I was huddled under an awning across the street from a cafe where Emma and David were having lunch. It was their anniversary, my wedding anniversary. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched them. They weren't the happy couple they projected to the world. Their conversation was stilted, their smiles strained. And then I saw it. Emma reached across the table, her hand covering his. She said something, and David flinched. It was a minuscule reaction, almost imperceptible. But to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. He pulled his hand away, his gaze dropping to the table. He looked up, his eyes scanning the cafe, and for a terrifying second, they seemed to meet mine. He looked away quickly, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, in his expression. In that moment, I knew, he knew. Maybe he hadn't known that first night. Maybe he'd believed Emma's story, whatever lie she'd concocted about me running off, about being unstable. But 20 years is a long time. Too many questions would have piled up. Too many inconsistencies. The way she laughed just a little too loudly at parties, a brittle, manic sound. The way she probably avoided talking about our childhood. A shared history he knew almost as well as I did. He'd seen the cracks in her story, felt the hollowness in their life together, and he had chosen to ignore them. He chose the beautiful house, the successful wife, the comfortable lie. He was my college sweetheart, the man who'd written me terrible poetry and promised me forever. He'd claimed to love me so desperately, yet he had slept next to my murderer for 2 decades and called it a marriage. That betrayal, David's quiet, continuous complicity, cut deeper than the bullet ever had. Emma hadn't built her empire of lies alone. She had an entire court of enablers. Her best friend, Monica, was a constant presence. I remembered Monica from college, sharp, ambitious, and utterly amoral. I watched them have brunch, their heads close together, laughing. I hacked into Monica's social media, a skill I'd picked up in the lonely late-night hours. I found old posts, vague references from 20 years ago about helping a friend through a tough time and clearing out the past. Monica had helped Emma dispose of my belongings, my clothes, my journals, my entire existence. She'd helped erase me. Then there was David's mother, Eleanor, a formidable woman who had always found me a little too independent for her son. In public, she was Emma's biggest champion. I overheard her at a fundraiser, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Emma has been through so much, she'd said to a circle of nodding socialites. To overcome the tragedy of a troubled twin, to build such a beautiful life, she's a pillar of strength. A troubled twin. That's what I'd been reduced to. A convenient dark backstory for their perfect family portrait. Even her professional life was built on this foundation of deceit. She was the CEO of a prominent local charity, the Archer Foundation for Veterans, a position that gave her a veneer of unimpeachable morality. Her boss, the chairman of the board, a man named Meister Harrington, publicly praised her vision and compassion. I wondered how much of that praise was genuine and how much was willful blindness. They all saw what they wanted to see, the charming, resilient woman who had risen from tragedy. They never looked close enough to see the killer lurking beneath the Chanel suit. Amidst this nest of vipers, there was one point of light. Lily. My Lily. She was everything good I had ever hoped to be. Untouched by the rot that festered in her home, she was studying pre-med, just as I had planned to do. Her social media wasn't filled with parties and expensive clothes. It was filled with pictures of her volunteering at a free clinic, of her tutoring underprivileged kids, of her hiking in the state park. She had my passion for medicine, my drive to help people. She was my ghost, walking and breathing and shining with a brilliance that her mother could never extinguish. Watching her was a special kind of torture. It was like looking at a version of myself from an alternate reality, a reality where I wasn't shot and left for dead. Every time I saw her smile, so open and genuine, my heart ached with a fierce, protective love and a profound, bottomless grief. She was the only innocent in this entire sordid affair, and she had no idea that the woman she called Mom was a monster, and the life she was living was stolen. The truth would destroy her. But the lies were already a poison, slowly seeping into her foundation. And I couldn't let that happen. Her innocence had to be preserved, but first, the guilty had to pay. The first thread I pulled was Emma's carefully crafted image as a philanthropist. Her foundation, the one that supposedly helped homeless veterans, was her crown jewel. It was the source of her social standing, her shield against any scrutiny, and it was a complete fraud. The inciting incident, the one that solidified my plan, came in the form of a news report. The Archer Foundation had just been awarded a $1 million federal grant. Emma was on TV, her face a mask of compassionate sincerity, talking about providing shelter and resources for the brave men and women who had served our country. "No veteran should have to sleep in the cold," she said, dabbing a tear from her eye. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. I walked past a shelter on my way home from the hospital and saw men huddled under thin blankets on the sidewalk. They weren't actors in Emma's PR campaign. They were real, forgotten people. The rage that had been simmering inside me for 20 years finally boiled over. It was a cold, clarifying fury. She hadn't just stolen my fiancé and my name. She'd stolen my compassion and twisted it into a grotesque, self-serving performance. Appearing passive was the key. Vengeance wasn't going to be a screaming match on her manicured lawn. It was going to be a quiet, systematic demolition. I scrubbed my Sarah Mitchell identity, making it as bland and forgettable as possible. I bought a pair of thick, non-prescription glasses, pulled my hair back into a severe bun, and dressed in dowdy cardigans and sensible shoes. Then, through a temp agency, I got a job as a low-level accountant at the Archer Foundation. Walking into that gleaming office for the first time was surreal. The marble floors, the expensive art on the walls, it was all paid for by lies. And there she was, Emma. She walked right past my cubicle on the first day, her heels clicking with an authority that grated on my nerves. She didn't even glance at me. I was just part of the furniture. "Good morning, Miss Archer," I'd murmur, my voice low and mousy. "Morning," she'd reply, her eyes already on her phone, a dismissive wave of her hand, my only acknowledgement. I spent my days entering data, fetching coffee, and being utterly invisible. I listened to her on conference calls, her voice smooth as silk as she charmed donors. "Every single dollar goes directly to our veterans programs," she'd lie, and I would bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I overheard her gossiping with Monica, who was on the foundation's board, of course. "The kitchen renovation is finally done," Emma said one afternoon, her voice carrying over my cubicle wall. "The contractor was a nightmare, but the Italian marble is to die for." I clenched my fists under my desk, the image of those veterans in the cold flashing in my mind. Her new kitchen, bought with the money, meant to keep them warm. My secret countermove began after hours. The night became my domain, the silent, empty office my hunting ground. Armed with a key I'd discreetly duplicated and the security guard's predictable patrol schedule, I owned that building from midnight to 4 a.m. My nursing skills came in handy: precision, attention to detail, a steady hand. I started with the financial records. Emma was arrogant, but she wasn't stupid. The books looked clean on the surface, but I knew the money was going somewhere. I spent weeks meticulously cross-referencing donation logs with expenditure reports. I taught myself about shell corporations and offshore banking. It was a slow, agonizing process. Then, I found it. A tiny discrepancy. A consulting fee paid to a company I'd never heard of, Innovest Solutions. The payments were regular, substantial, and vaguely described. A quick search revealed Innovest Solutions had no website, no phone number, no physical address. It was a ghost company. This was the thread. I pulled. Using a small, pen-sized camera, I began photographing everything. Invoices from Innovest, wire transfer confirmations to a bank in the Cayman Islands. I found a locked drawer in her desk. One night, I picked the lock, another skill born of desperation and long, empty years. Inside was a second ledger, a handwritten one. It detailed the real transactions, the money siphoned from the foundation, coded in a simple substitution cipher she must have thought was clever. It took me a single night to crack it. Kitchen reno, Tesla, Lily tuition. She wasn't just stealing. She was cataloging her crimes with smug satisfaction. The evidence smelled of her expensive perfume, the lingering scent in her office, and it tasted like the justice I had craved for 2 decades. The final piece was a recorded phone call. I placed a tiny listening device under her desk. It took a week, but I got what I needed. It was a call to her contact at the overseas bank. "Yes, another 100,000 from the grant money," Emma's voice smooth and confident. "Wire it to the usual account. Let's call this one winter relief efforts." I find the irony delightful. That was the nail in her coffin. I compiled everything into a neat, undeniable package. The forged signatures, the falsified expense reports, the photographs of her secret ledger, the encrypted bank statements, and the crystal clear audio recording. I created an anonymous email address and sent the entire dossier to two people: a hungry, Pulitzer-hungry investigative reporter I'd been following, and the regional head of the FBI's white-collar crime division. Then I waited. The public fallout was a beautiful, spectacular implosion. It took exactly 72 hours. The reporter's story broke online on a Friday afternoon. By evening, it was the lead story on every local news channel. News vans, like vultures sensing a kill, began circling her perfect house in my perfect neighborhood. On Monday morning, as I watched from my car down the street, two black sedans pulled up to the foundation's office. FBI agents, grim-faced and officials, streamed out and began carrying boxes of evidence from the building. I had my headphones in, listening to a police scanner app. I heard the dispatch, and then I heard her. I had bugged her car too. It was a frantic, sobbing phone call to David. "They're here! The FBI is here!" she shrieked, her voice stripped of all its polished composure. "They know! David, they know everything! You have to do something. You have to call someone. Hire the best lawyers. I don't care what it costs. You have to fix this." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The first domino had fallen, and it had fallen hard. With Emma's world imploding under the weight of federal charges, my focus shifted. David, my David, the man who had stood by and watched, who had chosen comfort over courage. He thought the fire was contained to Emma's life, that he was safe in his sterile, respectable world of medicine. He was wrong. The wrong he'd done was, in its own way, more insidious than Emma's theft. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd corrupted the very profession I held sacred. My nights as a nurse had shown me both the miracles of medicine and its failures. I saw patients fighting for their lives, trusting their doctors implicitly. David had betrayed that trust for profit. During my initial surveillance, I'd overheard snippets of conversations, seen the expensive cars in his practice's parking lot, and a suspicion had taken root. He wasn't just a successful surgeon, he was a salesman in a white coat. I started digging. It wasn't hard to find stories. Online forums for local medical reviews were filled with whispers. Dr. Archer recommended a major surgery, but I got a second opinion and it was totally unnecessary. Felt like he was upselling me the whole time. These were just murmurs, easily dismissed. But I knew David. I knew his ambition, and now I knew his capacity for moral compromise. I suspected he was recommending unnecessary, high-cost procedures to wealthy patients, padding his income while his practice's waiting list for routine. Essential care for less affluent patients grew longer and longer. He was feeding his guilty conscience with blood money, building a fortress of wealth around the secret he shared with Emma. Once again, appearing passive was my strategy. Emma's scandal had the family in a tailspin. No one was paying attention to the hiring of a new medical records clerk at David's sprawling surgical practice. I was Sarah Mitchell again, but this time, instead of dowdy cardigans, I wore crisp, professional scrubs. I kept my head down, my demeanor quiet and efficient. I was the invisible cog in his well-oiled machine. David saw me every day. Sometimes he'd even offer a distracted nod in the hallway. "Morning, Sarah," he'd say, his eyes already looking past me, his mind on his next high-value patient. He never recognized me. How could he? The vibrant, hopeful girl he had loved was buried under 20 years of pain and a carefully constructed facade. I was a ghost in his machine, and he had no idea I was about to haunt him. My days were spent organizing the very files that held his crimes. Mr. Henderson, triple bypass, insurance pre-approved for $200,000. Mrs. Gable, spinal fusion, quoted at $150. I filed the paperwork with a placid smile, all while my mind was racing, connecting the dots. The secret countermove, as before, happened in the quiet hours. But this time, I didn't need to break in. I had legitimate access. I just had to be smart. I started staying late, claiming I needed to catch up on filing. "Such a dedicated employee," the office manager once remarked. If only she knew. With the office to myself, I began my real work. I cross referenced patient files with insurance claims and billing codes. The pattern emerged quickly and was sickeningly clear. Patients with premium insurance plans were systematically diagnosed with conditions requiring the most expensive surgical interventions. I compared his diagnoses with the initial reports from their referring physicians. Discrepancies were everywhere. A mild arrhythmia became a life-threatening condition requiring a pacemaker. Normal age-related spinal wear and tear became a case for complex fusion surgery. He had it down to a science. He preyed on his patients' fears, using his authority and charisma to sell them procedures they didn't need. Each falsified record, each inflated insurance claim, felt like another bullet. Emma had shot me once, but David was firing again and again, wounding countless innocent people and desecrating the dream I once had of becoming a healer. I used a portable scanner to digitize everything: the doctor diagnostic reports, the pre-op notes filled with exaggerated symptoms, the exorbitant bills sent to insurance companies, the emails between him and the practice's CFO discussing revenue maximization strategies. It was a mountain of evidence, a systematic fraud that spanned at least 5 years and was worth millions of dollars. I even found a file on a patient who had suffered severe complications from an unnecessary knee replacement, a life altered forever because of David's greed. That file I held onto. It felt personal. This time, I didn't go to a reporter first. This was more precise. I compiled 2 separate packages. The first, containing the evidence of medical malpractice and unnecessary procedures, went to the state medical board sent anonymously from a public library computer. The second, detailing the systematic insurance fraud, went to the fraud divisions of the half-dozen major insurance carriers he had been bilking for years. I also sent a copy to the patient who had suffered complications, along with the name of the best malpractice lawyer in the state. The public fallout for David was quieter at first, but ultimately more devastating. It wasn't a sudden FBI raid, it was a slow, professional strangulation. The medical board launched a full investigation. The insurance companies, armed with undeniable proof, filed a massive lawsuit and alerted federal authorities. Malpractice lawsuits, led by the patient I'd armed, began to pile up. His empire collapsed not with a bang, but with the rustle of legal papers and the cold efficiency of institutional justice. He was suspended, then he lost his license. His practice, once a symbol of success, was shuttered, its assets frozen. I stood on the courthouse steps one afternoon, blending in with the crowd, and watched him stumble past a throng of reporters. His face, once handsome and confident, was gray and slack with defeat. Emma stood beside him, a gaunt figure in expensive clothes that now looked like a costume. Her own trial was looming, and now her husband, her partner in crime, was sinking right alongside her. She reached for his hand, but he didn't seem to notice. They were 2 shipwrecked sailors clinging to the wreckage, with an ocean of consequences closing in. They were cornered now. Emma was facing a prison sentence. David was a disgraced pariah, and their fortune, built on my stolen life, was being dismantled by lawsuits and federal seizures. Their fall from grace was the talk of the town. You would think they'd finally face the music, accept their fate. But people like Emma don't accept consequences. They just find new victims. The final, unforgivable wrong was when she turned on her own daughter. Desperate and with their assets frozen, Emma's final gambit was to weaponize Lily's future. Lily was brilliant, a shoo-in for scholarships at top universities based on merit alone. But that wasn't enough for Emma. She saw an opportunity to play the victim one last time. She coached Lily to apply for special hardship scholarships, the kind reserved for students who have overcome genuine adversity. Their hardship, as Emma framed it, was being the victims of a cruel, unjust witch hunt. "Tell them about the press camped outside our house," I overheard Emma telling Lily one evening, thanks to a new, more sophisticated bug I'd planted in their living room. "Tell them how your father's life's work was destroyed by false accusations. Cry if you can, Lily. People respond to tears." Her voice was calm, persuasive, poisonous. She was willing to corrupt the one pure thing left in their lives, to tarnish her own daughter's bright future with lies, all to save her own skin. It was the act of a true sociopath. My heart didn't just ache for Lily, it shattered. My passive role this time was perhaps the most painful. I took a temporary volunteer position in the admissions office at the very university Lily was applying to. My job was simple: data entry, sorting applications into neat piles. It was quiet, meticulous work, and it gave me a front row seat to Emma's final desperate act. I saw them on a campus tour. Emma, looking surprisingly put together in a cashmere coat, pointed out buildings, her arm draped protectively around Lily's shoulders. She was playing the part of the supportive mother, all while whispering instructions into her daughter's ear. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in Lily's posture. She was a good kid. She knew on some level that this was wrong, but she was 19, and her world was collapsing. She was clinging to the only mother she'd ever known. A few days later, Lily's application came across my desk. I opened the file with trembling hands. The essays were beautifully written, full of passion for medicine and a desire to heal. But then there was the personal statement for the hardship scholarship. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a sob story full of rehearsed pain and embellished struggles. It talked about their financial ruin and the emotional toll of public persecution. Reading those words, knowing Emma had dictated them, made me physically ill. My secret countermove was my masterpiece, the culmination of 20 years of pain and planning. I had already recorded the phone calls where Emma coached Lily on what to lie about, how to perform her victimhood for the scholarship committee. That was the easy part. The harder part was preparing the final revelation. This wasn't just about exposing scholarship fraud. It was about ending the entire charade. For years, I had been slowly, painstakingly gathering the evidence of my own existence and attempted murder. I had my original hospital records from 20 years ago, filed under a Jane Doe, which documented a gunshot wound, multiple fractures consistent with a fall down a flight of stairs, and severe malnutrition. I had dental records, school transcripts, and birth certificates. I had affidavits from the few people who knew the truth about Sarah Mitchell. And I had my trump card, the one thing that would prove, beyond any doubt, who Lily's mother truly was: a DNA test. The public fallout was a carefully orchestrated explosion. I submitted 2 packages simultaneously. The first went to the university's ethics committee. It contained Lily's falsified application, along with the audio recordings of Emma coaching her. The second, much larger package went directly to the lead FBI agent on Emma's fraud case. It contained everything: the evidence of the scholarship fraud, the old hospital records, and the documentation proving my true identity. I explained that the woman they knew as Emma Archer was an imposter, and that I, the real Emma Archer, had been her first victim. The charge of scholarship fraud was a lit match, but the revelation of attempted murder and identity theft was a barrel of gasoline. The news didn't just make headlines, it created a firestorm. Emma's house of lies, already crumbling, was finally obliterated. The foundation collapsed, taking David and their entire circle of enablers down with it. It was no longer a story of white-collar crime. It was a story of a stolen life, of a sister left for dead, of a darkness that had festered in their perfect suburb for 2 long decades. And at the center of it all was an innocent girl about to learn that her entire life was a lie. The final act was about to begin. The world tilted on its axis the day the manila envelope arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and overcast, matching the churning anxiety in my gut. I'd submitted my DNA sample alongside the evidence I'd given the FBI, a simple cheek swab that held the power to detonate a family. They had agreed to expedite the comparison against a sample they'd covertly obtained from Lily. For weeks, I had told myself I knew the truth. I knew she was mine. I saw it in her eyes, in the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, in the fierce intelligence that Emma could never have birthed. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. The crisp paper inside the envelope felt impossibly heavy. My hands shook as I unfolded it. There, in cold, clinical black and white, were the genetic markers, the long strings of code that spelled out the truth. Probability of maternity, 99.999%. The words swam before my eyes. She was mine. My daughter. A child born of my legacy, raised by my murderer. The confirmation didn't bring relief, only a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow, and the terrifying knowledge that I was about to shatter Lily's world forever. The call came from the FBI 2 days later. "She knows," Agent Miller said, his voice grim. "Somehow, your sister found out who Sarah Mitchell really is." I felt a cold dread snake up my spine. The hunter was now the hunted. That night, the motion alert on the security cameras I'd installed in my apartment pinged on my phone. I watched the grainy black and white footage, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was 3 a.m. A figure, cloaked in darkness, was picking the lock on my door. It was Emma. She slipped inside, silent as a wraith. In her hand, glinting under the faint moonlight from the window, was a gun. I lay perfectly still in my bed, my breathing even, pretending to be asleep as she crept into my bedroom. Her eyes were wild, unhinged with a desperation I recognized all too well. She stood over me, the weapon trembling in her hand, a perfect, horrifying echo of that night 20 years ago. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Had she come to finish the job, or had 2 decades of living a lie hollowed her out, leaving her too weak, too pathetic to pull the trigger again? The silence in the room was a living thing, thick with history and hate. I don't know how long she stood there, but she eventually retreated, a phantom of rage and fear. The next day, I walked into the hospital break room for a cup of coffee, my nerves still shot, and found her waiting for me. Not Emma, Lily. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a devastating confusion. She was clutching a piece of paper, a copy of the DNA results. My breath caught in my throat. This was the confrontation I had both craved and dreaded. She looked up at me, her gaze searching mine, desperate for an answer that made sense of the wreckage of her life. Her voice was a raw, broken whisper. "The FBI. They told me," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "They said my mom. She isn't. Is it true?" She held up the paper, her hand shaking. "Are you really my mother?" The question hung between us, thick and heavy as smoke, poised to either be the beginning of our healing or the final act of our family's destruction. Before I could answer Lily, my phone buzzed. It was Agent Miller again. "We have her," he said. "She turned herself in this morning, but she's playing games. She'll give us a full confession, the shooting, the identity theft, all of it, but only in exchange for a plea deal, and she has one condition." I held my breath. "She wants to see you, alone. She says she needs to talk to you one last time." A trap. It had to be a trap. The FBI would have the place wired, of course, but Emma was a cornered animal, unpredictable and dangerous. They were offering her a deal in exchange for the truth, but she was demanding a final face-to-face confrontation, 20 years in the making. Did I walk into her trap, risking everything when I was so close to the end? Or was it possible that after all this time, I had prepared an even deadlier surprise for her? The dominoes were falling faster now, hitting everyone in Emma's blast radius. The next call came from the hospital. It was one of my nursing colleagues. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice hushed. "We just got a patient in, attempted suicide. It's Dr. David Archer." The guilt, the shame, the public humiliation, it had all become too much. They'd found him in his garage, engine running, a half-empty bottle of scotch on the passenger seat. He was alive, but barely. I found myself standing outside his ICU room, looking through the glass. He lay there, intubated and unconscious, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that were keeping him alive. The man I had once loved, the man who had let me rot while he lived my life. His death would bring a certain kind of closure, but it would also rob me of the full public confession I needed to nail Emma's coffin shut. Would he survive to face justice and be forced to testify against the woman he'd protected for 2 decades? Or would he take her secrets, and his own, to the grave? Emma's trial began a month later. It was a media circus. I sat in the front row, a silent, stoic figure. Lily sat on the other side of the aisle, looking lost and alone. Emma, looking surprisingly composed, sat at the defense table. Her lawyer, a slick, high-priced shark, stood up to give his opening statement. "The prosecution will try to paint a picture of a monstrous betrayal," he began, his voice smooth and reasonable. They will present to you a woman, this woman, he said, gesturing to me, who claims her identity was stolen. But the defense will prove something far more shocking. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping over the jury. We will prove that the real Emma Archer died in that basement 20 years ago, and that this woman, this stranger, is a clever, manipulative imposter who has stolen the identity of a dead girl to enact a twisted revenge plot. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. He was accusing me of being the fraud. It was a brilliant, insane move. With the DNA evidence still being formally processed for trial, and my entire case built on my word against hers, who would the jury believe? The decorated philanthropist or the ghost with the scars? The world saw a vengeful nurse, a woman who had clawed her way back from the dead with nothing but grit and fury. They saw a meticulously planned but ultimately small-scale revenge. They had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes. The power balance hadn't just shifted, it had never been what it seemed. The first revelation came from my own lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur, who had been referred to me. We were organizing documents for Emma's trial, spreading papers across his mahogany desk. He slid a thick binder toward me. "There's something you need to understand about your inheritance," he said. "What inheritance?" I scoffed. "Emma spent it all, the house, the cars, the designer clothes. That was all from the trust fund my grandmother left me." Arthur smiled faintly. "Not exactly. Your grandmother was a very clever woman. She had seen betrayals in her own circle. The trust was structured with some advanced fraud protection. Every dollar Emma accessed was flagged, documented, and traced through a secondary hidden protocol. She was essentially given a leash, a multi-million-dollar line of credit that we could track. The real inheritance, the principal $50 million trust, has been sitting in an escrow account untouched for 20 years. It was set up to be inaccessible without your biometric confirmation. Your thumbprint and a retinal scan, to be precise." I stared at him speechless. $50 million. It had been waiting for me this whole time. Emma's lavish life had been a sham, a carefully monitored allowance drawn from a fund she never truly controlled. Arthur continued, sensing my shock. "Which brings me to my next point. Your recovery from the basement wasn't just miraculous luck." He opened a new file, and inside was a picture of an elderly woman with kind, wrinkled eyes, Maria. She had been my grandmother's housekeeper, a woman I vaguely remembered from my childhood as a quiet presence who always smelled of cinnamon and herbs. "Maria found you," Arthur explained. "She had a key to the house. Your grandmother had always told her, if anything ever happens, check the wine cellar. She never said why. Maria found you, more dead than alive. She couldn't take you to a hospital. Emma would have been alerted. So she took you to her own home. She's a curandera, a folk healer. Her family has practiced traditional healing for generations. She nursed you back to health with herbs and remedies and sheer force of will. She helped you establish the Sarah Mitchell identity and has been keeping your secret all these years." My mind reeled. Maria. She had saved my life. She hadn't just been a passive helper, she had been my guardian angel, my silent partner. "She's been watching them," I whispered, the pieces clicking into place. The little tip-offs, the anonymous information that had sometimes landed in my lap, it had come from her. "She has," Arthur confirmed. "But she wasn't alone." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Your grandmother, your mother, Maria, they were all part of a network. A very quiet, very powerful, very wealthy network of women. Think of them as a silent sisterhood. They have an informal charter to protect their own from situations exactly like yours. Family betrayals, abusive husbands, stolen inheritances. They have been waiting patiently for 20 years for you to be ready to reclaim your life." It was an unbelievable truth. I wasn't a lone wolf. I had an army at my back I never knew existed. The private investigators who helped me track Emma's finances, they were funded by the network, the federal contacts who took my anonymous tips so seriously, friends of the network, the media connections who had amplified the scandal, all part of it. The demolition of Emma and David's life hadn't been my solitary work. It had been a carefully executed operation by a secret society of powerful women who had been watching over me the entire time. Arthur slid one last document across the desk. It was a letter on thick, creamy stationery bearing the crest of Harvard University. "Your original acceptance," he said softly. "It was never rescinded. The network had it put into suspension, pending your return. The dean of admissions at the time was a friend. Your spot has been held, and a full scholarship, funded by an anonymous donor from the network, is waiting for you." I picked up the letter. At 43 years old, I could still go to medical school. I could still become the doctor I had always dreamed of being. The life Emma's bullet had tried to steal from me was being handed back, whole and complete. In that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't the desperate, scarred victim anymore. I wasn't Sarah Mitchell, the night shift nurse fighting for scraps of justice. I was Emma Archer, the true heir to a massive fortune backed by a shadowy cabal of influential women who could provide unlimited resources, federal protection, and legal immunity. The hunter had, in fact, been the hunted all along. Emma and David, scrambling in their collapsing world, had no idea what they were really up against. They thought they were fighting a ghost. They were about to learn they were fighting a queen with an army at her command. The end came, as it had to, in a sterile, impersonal courtroom. The jury foreman, a woman with a severe haircut and an unreadable expression, stood to read the verdict. She didn't look at Emma. That was the first sign. "On the charge of attempted murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, the woman known as Emma Archer." She paused, and the room held its breath. "Guilty." A ripple went through the courtroom. "On the charge of identity theft?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud?" "Guilty." With each pronouncement of guilty, Emma seemed to shrink. When the foreman sat down, the dam of her composure finally broke. A raw, animalistic sob tore from her throat, and she collapsed to her knees on the courtroom floor. The designer mask she had worn for 2 decades shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, pathetic woman who had pulled a trigger in a fit of jealous rage. Her lawyers tried to help her up, but she flailed, her hands reaching out, her eyes locking on mine. "I'm sorry," she wailed, the words echoing in the stunned silence. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll confess to everything. Just tell them. Please forgive me." But the pleas didn't end with her. A few days later, I went to the hospital. David, recovering from his suicide attempt, was a shadow of the man he'd been. He was pale and gaunt, the specter of his own criminal charges hanging over him. When he saw me in the doorway, his eyes filled with tears. He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I'm so sorry, Em," he whispered, using my real name for the first time in 20 years. His voice was a broken rasp. "I loved you. I swear I did. I was a coward. I've been living in hell every single day, knowing what she did, knowing I did nothing." He begged for my forgiveness, promised to testify, to give me every penny he had left. "Just say you forgive me," he pleaded. The enablers came next, scurrying like rats from a sinking ship. Monica, Emma's best friend and accomplice, called me sobbing hysterically. She offered to return every piece of jewelry, every painting Emma had ever gifted her, as if those trinkets could wash away the sin of helping to erase a person. David's mother, Eleanor, wrote me long, rambling letters filled with apologies and claims of ignorance, saying she'd suspected something was wrong but was too afraid of her strong-willed daughter-in-law to speak up. Even Mr. Harrington, the chairman of Emma's fraudulent nonprofit, reached out. He offered to make me the new CEO, to let me run the organization Emma had so thoroughly corrupted, a pathetic attempt to buy his own absolution. The most painful plea, however, came from Lily. My daughter, the only truly innocent soul in this entire tragedy. She came to my apartment, her eyes swollen from crying, her young face etched with a pain that no 19-year-old should ever have to bear. She didn't make excuses for Emma. She didn't deny the truth. She just asked for mercy. "She's still the only mother I've ever known," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know what she did was monstrous, but please, she's going to die in prison. Isn't that enough? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" Her raw, genuine pain was the only thing in this whole affair that gave me pause. It cut deeper than Emma's bullet, deeper than David's betrayal. I listened to them all. I let their apologies, their justifications, their desperate pleas wash over me. I looked each of them in the eye, at Emma through the glass of the prison visiting room, at David in his sterile hospital bed, at Lily in my own living room. And to each of them, I gave the same calm, quiet answer. An answer that had taken me 20 years of agony to earn the right to say. No. No forgiveness for the woman who pulled the trigger and left me to die without a second thought. No mercy for the man who chose a comfortable lie over the woman he claimed to love. No pardons for the enablers who propped up that lie because it benefited them. No exceptions for people who showed me no mercy when I was bleeding out in the dark. My forgiveness was not theirs to have. It was a currency they hadn't earned, a gift they didn't deserve. The justice I had fought for wasn't about redemption arcs for my tormentors. It was about consequences. 2 years later, at the age of 45, I walked across a stage under bright auditorium lights. The dean of Harvard Medical School placed a doctoral hood over my shoulders, the weight of the fabric a tangible symbol of a dream resurrected. My diploma felt heavy and real in my hands. In the front row, I saw Lily. She was smiling, a genuine, peaceful smile, her eyes shining with tears. But this time, they were tears of pride. She had come to understand through therapy and long, difficult conversations that justice and love were not mutually exclusive. She knew that holding the woman who raised her accountable was its own form of healing, for both of us. I didn't open a fancy practice in a wealthy suburb. Instead, I went back to the old neighborhood, the place where Sarah Mitchell had hidden for 20 years. I used a portion of the trust fund, my trust fund, to open a free clinic, treating the very people David's practice had pushed to the bottom of waiting lists. The sharp, clean scent of antiseptic no longer reminded me of a hospital night shift and survival. It smelled of purpose. It smelled like the life I was always meant to have. Tonight, I'm standing on the balcony of my reclaimed home in Malibu, the one I'd picked out with David a lifetime ago. The ocean breeze is cool and carries the scent of salt and possibility. As I watch the sun melt into the Pacific, I feel the last traces of Sarah Mitchell, the armor I wore for so long, finally fall away. Emma is a number in the federal prison system. David, after serving a short sentence for fraud, lives in obscurity, his reputation and fortune gone. Their enablers face their own civil suits and social ruin. They are ghosts now. Before coming out here, I wrote a letter, not to any of them, but to the 23-year-old girl who fought for her life in a dark, dusty cellar. I thanked her for her strength, for her stubborn refusal to give up, for holding on to a flicker of hope when darkness was all she had. I told her we did it. Her dreams, our dreams, had finally come true. Just 20 years, a bullet wound, and a lifetime of pain later than planned. A soft footstep sounds behind me. It's Lily. She's home from her pre-med classes, a volunteer shift at my clinic under her belt. She joins me at the railing, and we stand together in comfortable silence, watching the last sliver of sun disappear. We are building something new, something beautiful and strong, from the ashes of Emma's destruction. The woman who pulled the trigger is a forgotten nightmare. But the woman who survived? She is finally, completely, and irrevocably free. Completely,